My name is Stanley Blum. I'm the curator of the Jazz in July Festival, and we are currently in the Wild Gallery of the 92nd Street Y, and I'm sitting here with Hank O'Neill, whose pictures, his photographs, his portraits decorate these walls.
Part of the story about all these pictures around the gallery, most of the folks in here are friends and people that I've known a long, long time or worked with a long, long time. And that none of the pictures work, that is, at least the portraits don't work unless somebody's giving you something back, and as often as not in the portraits they are. In the playing pictures that's something else. But if you look at Jonah Jones or Cab Calloway, they're sitting there holding still for a portrait, a serious picture. Certain kinds of photographs, black and white, is just better, and it was best described to me by a lady named Bernice Abbott, who was a mentor, somebody I worked with for almost 2 decades. And we were talking about color photography one day, because Bernice took virtually no color photographs. I mean, there's a tiny, tiny body of work of color, maybe 1/10 of 1% of her work is in color. When I go out to take a serious picture with a large format camera, it's in black and white. As often as not, I will take a 35mm camera, or possibly even a Rolleiflex 2 1/4, and cover it also in color, just to have it. But those are the ones that rarely get shown. Because, and particularly, say if it's for a record cover or something, sometimes you need the color for the cover, or you need it for the picture on the back of the CD or something like that.
Why don't we take a look around the room, Hank, and discuss some of the pictures that I have some thoughts about, and perhaps you can explain how they came into being.
Lead on. Dizzy had a basement full of memorabilia and fun things, and he wasn't allowed to have any of that stuff on the first floor of the house. Everything had of his had to be in the basement, and that's where we always hung out, not upstairs. I remember I got to hang out upstairs once watching a television show, but maybe for half an hour. Then Lorraine put us downstairs. So
he's got a certain sweetness to his face.
Well, he was a very sweet, terribly bright man, just as smart as could be, and we were fortunate enough to be able to work with him, a dozen times or so on the various festivals and things. It was 6 minutes after 3 at his house up on Lexington Avenue, way uptown, and this was exactly the way it was. He was working on music. He was working on something. This is his kitchen table. The reason it's darker in this corner than because the window was over in this direction and the light came this way. You can actually see the reflection in the clock. That was one of the rules in the Harlem project, the Ghost of Harlem, was that you never set anything up. It had to be the way it was.
Au natural.
Yeah. Clark Terry, in the study of his home that he had out in Whitestone, and the most interesting thing to me about this picture is not the expression, which is terrific, and all the all this clutter and litter and everything. Clark was desperately trying to stop smoking, and he has this pacifier cigarette in his hand, and just by sort of good luck almost, because of the way that cigarette is sticking out, it gives a funny dimension to everything. Bob was playing at a small club up near the hotel called Hanverkeren, and I set myself down at a table fairly close to the bandstand. I never moved, and he didn't either. The only thing he changed was the horn that he was playing. And I mean, he's got the clarinet, he's got the soprano, and then he has the straight soprano. And these are obviously different songs, but although occasionally he does mix up the instruments in the same song. But I just thought it would be fun. I mean, the only thing that's missing, he didn't bring the alto that night, or I could have maybe had a picture that went down to here. So, but Bob's a marvelous player on all of them, but I like him best on the the soprano, the curved soprano. That's
yeah.
what I think is the prettiest.
Yeah.
It's so much fun to hook these two guys up. I mean, they both were very blunt and to the point and no nonsense. Joe Venuti playing the piano. Actually, he's teaching a song to Zoot here. And both were no-nonsense kind of guys, and both had wonderful sense of humor. I mean, I remember one time doing a record project with Venuti up in Albany, and there were some noisy stagehands. And I mean, at this time, Joe was 75 or something. And he went over and started yelling at them and was inviting them into the alley where he was going to beat them to a pulp. I mean, even at the age of 75. This was the consummate professional. One time, the very first time I ever worked with him, he said I was supposed to come and get him to go to the rehearsal at 2 o'clock. And I remember getting there at 3 minutes after 2 or something, and he was standing in the door waiting, and he said, "Don't you ever be late again."
Wow.
And I never was.
Wow.
And he went out and delivered the goods 100% every time we ever worked with him. And fortunately, it was many times. There were lots and lots of shows here at the Y where Milt was a part. I mean, Milt had such an incredible career. He was a part of everything.
Yes.
I mean, since the late 20s. I mean, he wasn't exactly the last man standing, but he almost was.
Yeah.
In that he, you know, some folks don't play well into their advanced years, but Milt played pretty good into his mid-80s. This was Max's house and Cliff Jackson's house at 818 Ritter Place, uptown in the Bronx, and had just gone up to see her. It was a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, I forget what, and she didn't have on. You see, this is very different than this,
yeah.
And she didn't have her hair on that day. And I remember the comment was, you know, what you see is what you get, and that's what I got. And I had known Max she was probably the first or second or third maybe musician that I ever visited them in their home in New York City when I came here in 1967, because I had known Cliff, her husband, Cliff Jackson, in Washington, D.C. when he would come down and play Blues Alley, and he always says, "Well, come by and visit." And so I came to New York, and I did. This was 1969 at a jazz festival in Virginia, and it's an accident, actually. It was the last picture on a roll of film, which had never been printed or developed, or had been developed, but had never been printed, because when it was originally processed, the guy who had developed the film for me had hung it up with a piece of Scotch tape, and it covered this entire frame. And I was going through it about a year ago, going through some old negatives, and I said, "Gee, I wonder what's under that Scotch tape. It looks like it's a picture." And we got the photo flow and everything out and worked on the negative, and sure enough, it was Eddie at the end of the roll, and you can tell he's playing. I mean, he's just struck something, and he has the little leprechaunish, I've had a couple of drinks kind of look, and having a nice time. There was a wonderful concert in 1996 that was called Eastwood After Hours. It was at Carnegie Hall, and they just literally rounded up everybody who he liked a lot, and there must have been 40 musicians. And they all rehearsed for 2 days over at SIR, and then they rehearsed all afternoon on the day of the concert on the stage of Carnegie Hall. This is during the rehearsal. But Clint's a pretty good piano player, writes his music. This fella here is Lenny Niehaus, who many people know from, you know, the Stan Kenton days and stuff like that. But Lenny was Clint's Army buddy. They were in the Army together in the early 50s. And they still are. Lenny has served as music director on probably 2/3 of Clint's movies, and certainly all the movies since Clint's been making his own, and most recently did Mystic River for him, conducted the Boston Symphony playing Clint's own compositions. This is John Faddis, James Moody, and you know that Clint actually used Moody in a movie as an actor. In Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Moody is in it as an actor, and this is Gary Smulyan. And it was a good, fun afternoon, having a nice time.